Okay. Afternoon everyone, my name is Carl Sherwood, and believe it or not, I'm a structural engineer. So, an amazing animal. I used to work for Westfield for 15 years, high-rise construction, graduated from just over next door there. So I did an MBA in about 2000 and came back here, and now I'm a lecturer in the School of Economics, and the area that I've got into is statistics. So maths, I guess, is hung in there. So I've been doing it for about 9 years, since I graduated in 2000 with the MBA. And I started out at Ipswich, as well as doing a lot of work with AusA. So a lot of special type students. And once I started out at Ipswich, obviously the students out there have a different way of learning to here when you look at the OPs. And the interesting thing that came out of it was I tended to tell stories when I try to explain things. And I guess it comes from the engineering background, trying to put things simply and in real world examples. So it turned out that things like the normal distribution, I ended up telling stories about seagulls catching a fish when they dived into a pond. And then I had to try and explain the sampling distribution of the mean. So for some reason I came up with, well, what if we had a fish farm and scooped out a bucket of fish, and I could measure the length of each fish, add them up and get the average length of fish in a bucket. And if you do that, you can describe it as a sampling distribution of the mean. So what animal did that? After a bit of discussion over the years, it turned out to be a pelican. It's got a gob full of fish. And so I kept going, even to the point where I ended up with this thing called the sampling distribution of proportion. You say that and I go, you get what? So I came up with freaky fish. How many fish in a bucket have got 3 eyes? Yeah? So maybe there's 5 out of 100, 5% of the population are freaky. So once you start to connect these ideas of pictures and stories to formulas and crazy equations, the pass rate went from something like 40% to 80% within like that first year. So I was asked to come back and do it again, and I was able to maintain that pass rate around 75-80% at Ipswich, and we almost beat St Lucia in one semester, whose average pass rate is 75. Now the OP difference is like 5 to 14. So obviously people started asking the question, what the hell is going on here? Are you handing out lollies or what? So that sort of sparked my interest, and I did the same thing here for a while, and the same thing, the pass rate in my classes jumped over 90%, whereas the rest was found around about the 70% mark. So because of that, my friend Greg here, who I knew since 2001 or something, Greg did an MBA and I came to do it hand, bumped into me in 2007, and from that discussion he said, look mate, we've got some money here, strategic grant stuff, you know, the teaching and learning grants here. I said, maybe I could have a crack at it. So Greg helped me put the application together. Didn't take us that long, and lo and behold, we got $27,000 to try and put this thing together. And obviously, the university thought there must have been something there. So I said, righto, let's give it a go. So in 2007, had a chat to Greg, and we walked over, and Audrey's got this piece of paper here, and on a whiteboard we scribbled down some diagrams like this, and I just explained to Greg that first picture is like the seagull, and the second one's the pelican, and the third one's the freaky fish. So you can look at all those equations and sort of think, well, how the heck do I capture all this stuff? So a few conversations with Greg in about November of 2007, he tried to convince me that, oh look, you just come over and sit in the lab and twiddle away and you'll build that in no time. Yeah, sure. So I got a bit more complicated than that. So I went to New Zealand, had a holiday, came back, put the application in. Probably by mid-2008 we actually got the money, and I went, oh now I've got to do it, which is really hard, as most of you would know if you're teaching and doing stuff. So it wasn't until this time last year, finally got a research assistant, we sat down and tried to build what we're after, and it became a little, I was always a bit concerned because what Greg explained to me was it's problem-based learning. So you read all the previous examples and it was like, well, here's a story, we do this and maybe you end up with this result. But in statistics with this stuff, you have to come up with exact answers and try to get people to come up with understanding stuff without saying, well, here's a problem, you go off and try and figure it out. Like, that was all a bit vague. So all of a sudden, it's still problem-based learning, but it's trying to use a tool which wasn't really suited to my needs, and I had to try and tweak it in a way to make it work. So from what I can understand, not too many people have tried to do the maths type problems the way I have here. And in a sense, what I've done is tried to create a story which was all about, do you want to buy a fish farm? So Julie's been helping me as a second researcher, because we got a second grant, didn't we, in the middle of this year for another $12,000. to try and go beyond where we're at with Greg, which is now we're doing some research, and Julie can tell you more about trying to work out the impact and effectiveness of this SBLi system, as well as are these pictorial icons what's important in trying to get the message across to students. And that's where we think the real impact has come. So when you see this SBLi and you open up these screens, so this is the 4 scenarios. So I actually did 4 what I called link scenarios. So the first one was just on the seagull and the normal distribution, talking about the length of the single fish, trying to understand that concept. And in there was audios of what I talk about in the tutorials. So students could go and click on it, and in 2 minutes, hear it again. And I got a lot of people coming back and saying, it was great to go home and hear it again, because it's fairly complicated. And in there was also the typical multiple choice question type things where you could practice the stuff. There were summaries of the theory that I actually did. And then once you did all that, you then had to go to this scenario. And the first one I cooked up was if you wanted to buy a fish farm or any business, because I'm a business-orientated person, and I just did the postgrad statistics for business students, I'm interested in applying this stuff and making money. So the question was, if I had to buy a fish farm, what sort of information would I need? So of course the first thing I did was I went to this fish farm and the guy gave me the historical records of what he was producing on this farm. Now we made a data file up for what he gave, and the students had to go through that and work out, well, what is the average length of the fish? What's the average weight? What's the average income that this guy makes? And of course, it agreed with what he said. But then what you had to do in the next scenario was go down to that pond and actually get a sample of fish and test out what he said. And of course, it didn't match. So what did he do? He cooked the books. Just like any professional or business person would do, right? Who wants to sell a business? If you sell your house, you don't tell them the weeks. Right? They've got to find out. So through this series of scenarios, we then use statistics in sampling, then there's confidence intervals and hypothesis testing, which is this last one. And all of them are trying to draw conclusions based on samples. And from what I could gather, when I teach this stuff in the undergrad, it goes over about, these scenarios cover, 8 lectures. So we do the lecture for 2 weeks, whack the scenario up, and they can practice it. Do the 2 lectures, put the scenario up. We did it for the first time last semester in the postgrad 7300 course and the undergrad course. It was for free. It was a first trial because we're just testing the stuff out, trying to get some feedback. Over the summer we're trying to spice it up, modify things. The next semester we're going to launch it because I'm a lecturer for the undergrad course and there's 1,000 students. So we're really going to get a heck of a lot of stuff coming out of that, I think. But the feedback initially was that people liked that shot, they liked the pictures, they liked the videos, the audios, the interactive type stuff, the multiple choice. And curiously enough, I was also doing 3 tutorials last semester at the undergrad level, and I would say in those classes a vast majority of people were using it. But in all the other classes for the other tutorials, they'd look at that and say, well, what are you talking about? What's a freaky fish? What's a seagull? They had no idea. Yeah? So it was curious that there's these 2 groups, and that's what Julie's helping analyse now. Those who have used this, what are the impacts on their marks versus what's the impacts of those who have just had the regular run-of-the-mill, here's a normal distribution, that kind of stuff. As a result of this, the reason I took on what Greg asked me to do 2 years ago was a couple of reasons. It probably helped. I had the grant before I went for level B lecturer's position because I was just doing casual stuff. I'm an engineer and I was flat out. And I decided, okay, I'll give it a go. Why? Because from there, I've now got book publishers after me who want to actually do this. And I wanted to actually put it in a book and write the stuff up. If I could also use Greg's, or this stuff here, to try and collect some data, I wouldn't be able to just say, well, my students have done so well at Ipswich. Using this system, I can now actually get online surveys, which Audrey and Julie helped pick up from the log. We're actually getting people saying things, and it's pretty clear that you can get good scientific evidence or data to say who's doing what, and it's not just me. You can use this stuff to do all sorts of things, not just help students improve, but for your own benefit, to try and come back and say, well, hey, there's been an impact because I've used this.